Zulfi Bhutto of Pakistan, His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 10 Provincial Problems Proliferate, mid 1972 to early 1973. We have planted a very small and delicate plant of democracy, Bhutto told a Western journalist that October of 1972. But suddenly, now, after 15 years of sealed lips, people once again have gone on a verbal rampage without any regard for each other's feelings. They justify this as freedom of expression, disregard all laws from treason to perjury, and call it freedom. Was it Kasuri's latest verbal rampage he had in mind? The head of intelligence at the time, Saeed Ahmad Khan, had warned Bhutto in a top secret note of a rift among the People's Party members of the National Assembly from Punjab. Many of them feel the president is too busy with international affairs. He urged that greater care be extended to the dissidents, suggesting that the governor of Punjab, Mustafa Khar, might do more by way of entertaining those disaffected members because Punjab has to be kept on the right side of the government at all costs. Zulfi wrote to and spoke with Khar and Punjab's Chief Minister Malik Miraj Khalid about the urgent problem, and both agreed to pay more attention to troublemakers like Kasuri. But Kasuri continued his bombasts against me. Zulfi wrote Malik Mehraj and Khar that September, surprised they had not as yet ostracized him for such outrageous behavior. Zulfi even started to suspect his own chief minister, who often sat next to Kasuri in the National Assembly, of perhaps agreeing with him as he cast subtle aspersions on my leadership. Zulfi feared intrigues were brewing all over Punjab and a kind of cutthroat mentality was taking shape there. Devout older Muslims, as well as disillusioned younger idealists, were now losing faith in Bhutto. Some because of what they saw or heard about the unofficial doings of Governor Khar. Many people wrote to warn Bhutto about the private life of his most powerful governor, but he always staunchly supported Khar because Khar was his closest friend, his alter ego, in many ways a more youthful, more virile, handsomer reflection of his true self. They had driven together through the valleys of fire, had been in and out of the same jails, tasted the same tear gas, knew the same women, faced the same gangs of gundas, targeting them both with bullets and stones. And now they were tarred with the same rumor mongering tales of lasciviousness and lechery. Our country is unfortunately a country of liars and a country of rumors, Zulfi replied to one such letter. Rumors spread like wildfire, and people tell lies by swearing on the Holy Quran. Only recently it was on the lips of everybody that I had got married again. Neither I can help this kind of rumor mongering, nor can any of my colleagues. The Jamaat-e Islami has paid workers whose duty it is to go from door to door, telling lies and to sit in restaurants, fabricating stories to damage the name of the government. I am disgusted with the conduct of some of the parliamentarians, casting aspersions on my closest comrades in arms will not be taken lightly. Like Zulfi Bhutto, Sher-e Punjab, Lion of the Punjab, Mustafa Khar was a large landowner, a stirring speaker, and a great lover. He too spiced his Urdu with sharp, racy language, saying whatever he felt, rarely beating around the bush when he got angry. At the end of July 1972 in Lahore, he threatened to pull out the tongues of all those who abused Bhutto or talked of breaking the country. Soon after, Zulfi called Ahmad Raza Kasuri's bombast to his attention. Khar called a press conference at his house in Lahore and warned all legislators to remember that, but for the leadership of Mr. Bhutto, they would not have been returned to so much as a local school board. At Islamabad in mid-October, he said much the same thing about himself, confessing that his own success was due entirely to Bhutto's popularity. A month later, he attributed the prompt solutions of problems half a century old to the president's glorious leadership. Immensely were benefiting the masses. Some of Khar's sycophantic supporters had started to hail him as Qaid-e-Punjab, leader of the Punjab, but he called upon them to desist. There was only one great Pakistan People's Party leader, Qaid-e-Awam Bhutto. Khar knew how to keep Bhutto happy, and Zulfi always enjoyed spending time as often as possible at the Lahore house of his handsome, convivial comrade in arms. Ahmad Raza was not the only Kasuri to bother Bhutto during the first autumn of his presidency. Law Minister Mia Mahmood Ali Kasuri, no relative of Ahmad Raza, Kasuri simply means town dweller, who was also Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, thanks to which he chaired the National Assembly and had been elected by his colleagues there to chair the important Constitution Drafting Committee, resigned from the cabinet in early October. Mahmood Ali Kasuri was one of Pakistan's most respected liberal lawyers, having served the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, Lord Russell's War Crimes Tribunal, and the World Habeas Corpus Commission. As the most courageous member of the cabinet, Mahmood Ali had often argued with Bhutto over the earlier retention of martial law and excessive emergency regulations. He had first resigned in September when he saw that Bhutto was determined to introduce a centralized presidential system rather than the more democratic parliamentary federalism to which the Pakistan People's Party had long been committed and which had initially attracted Mahmood Ali to join the party. Bhutto feared that the resignation would inevitably delay framing a constitution and at first persuaded Mahmood Ali to retract it, promising to support his constitution drafting labors. Mahmood Ali, whose assembly seat was also from Lahore, was warned by Governor Khar to toe the strict line, but then found Bhutto turning a deaf ear to his appeals for Bhutto's public affirmation of recently promised support. On 4th October, he resigned again, sending a copy of his letter to the press. The following day, Bhutto publicly accepted it with immediate effect and urged him to resign his National Assembly seat. Bhutto then moved his old friend and lawyer, Abdul Hafiz Pirzada, into both vacant cabinet positions, knowing that he had to act fast to prevent further desertions or weakening of public confidence in the promised constitution. Every political challenge, such as that posed by Mahmood Ali Kasuri's public resignation, galvanized Bhutto into action with dazzling speed. Attacks that might have intimidated or paralyzed less adroit political leaders served only to send a flood of adrenaline to Zulfi Bhutto's brain. He convened the All Parties Conference in Rawalpindi less than 2 weeks after Kasuri's resignation. And 4 days later, he had cajoled and convinced, pleaded with, and browbeat every leader of the 9 major parties represented in Pakistan's National Assembly and of all 4 provinces to reach an unprecedented unanimous accord on a new constitutional formula. It was the most scintillating political waltz any Pakistani leader had ever performed. Deft maneuvering, personal charm, awareness of the strengths and weaknesses of each of the invited players achieved in 4 days what none of his predecessors from Liaquat Ali Khan to Yahya Khan had been able to do in almost a quarter century of futile constitutional wrangling. Now that Mahmood Ali was off his team, Zulfi approved a parliamentary federal formula as the keynote of his October 20th constitutional accord. He was always ready to discard any baggage that threatened to sink his political bark, and hence tossed overboard without a second thought the more centralized French presidential system of which he had long seemed enamored. He would be happy to serve as the Prime Minister rather than President. To ensure Pakistan's stability, however, Zulfi instead insisted on raising the Westminster's simple majority formula for any vote of no confidence to no less than two-thirds of the National Assembly, at least for the first 15 years of the new constitution's existence. That would assure him three consecutive full terms in Premier office, which on the eve of his 45th birthday seemed enough to Zulfi. His dark hair, now a fringe of fast receding grey, his waistline bulging from all the late official banquets at which he ate and drank much more than was good for his deteriorating health. Bhutto met with Maulana Maududi on the eve of his Pindi conference, bringing that leading Muslim conservative and his opposition Jamaat around to accepting the accord by agreeing to make Pakistan an Islamic republic, whose president and prime minister would always have to be Muslims, and by promising that no law would be passed under his constitution against any teachings and requirements of Islam, as articulated in the Holy Quran and Sunnah, teachings of the Prophet. Islam was to be the state religion of Pakistan, and Zulfi satisfied Maududi that the Islamic socialism he had long promised when first campaigning against Ayub had nothing in common with communism and would in no way violate any laws of Islam. Frontier mullahs of Jamiyat-e-Ulama-e-Islami had, of course, earlier joined National Awami Party leaders in allying themselves with the Pakistan People's Party and now were satisfied with the new constitutional formula, which promised a federation, wherein the units will be autonomous with such boundaries and limitations on their powers and authorities as may be prescribed. Zulfi's reluctance to agree to that fundamental federal formula had been one of the major causes of Kasuri's resignation. Some 10 members of Bhutto's own Pakistan People's Party from the Punjab, including the irrepressible Ahmad Raza Kasuri, had associated themselves with Mahmood Ali Kasuri's liberal left wing opposition to their president's Bonapartism. So, the constitutional accord also promised preservation of democracy against any and all oppression and tyranny, and the elimination of all forms of exploitation. Zulfi Bhutto's mind, politics was not only the art of the possible, but the promise of reconciliation and the integration of opposites and everyone's favorite desire. Bhutto launched a whirlwind tour of the Northwest Frontier Province in mid-November 1972, visiting all of its 9 districts and 6 tribal political agencies, addressing 24 large meetings in 11 days, and covering some 1,500 miles with his large entourage of party faithful, media reporters, people's guards, and members of his new parliamentary elite federal security force. Everywhere he spoke, friendly crowds were buzzed in. Pakistan People's Party flags and huge pictures of his face flew overhead, and he announced time and time again, "We have laid the foundations of democracy." He repeatedly asked for more time, however, to achieve all he had promised, all he was still promising to do. The tour ended with a mammoth meeting at Jinnah Park in Peshawar, where he urged that the moment had come to recognize the reality of Bangladesh, pointing out that it would be good for Pakistan's economy and lead to the return of all Pakistani prisoners of war. He also promised that now that the principles of a democratic and federal constitution ensuring provincial autonomy had been agreed to by all parties in the National Assembly, that the permanent constitution would assure Pakistan a true Awami Raj, people's rule, starting in the new year. The next day, Zulfi went to Lalpur and announced his decision to release all 617 Indian prisoners of war held there since the 1971 war had begun. It was a humane, wise, and bold unilateral initiative, Bhutto diplomacy at its best. It cast a revealing light on both India and Bangladesh for continuing to detain Pakistani prisoners long after the war had ended. Zulfi knew that Pakistan People's Party hopes raised in the aftermath of the Simla summit had been sadly deflated by now, and he was anxious to wean Bangladesh back toward its Muslim brother Pakistan. He had received many reports of how disillusioned Bangladeshis were becoming with West Bengal's tough Hindu Marwari bankers and business tycoons. Yet, how desperately Mujib needed financial help of every kind. He also understood the anger and frustration of the relatives of the more than 90,000 Pakistani prisoners over his government's impotence in regard to their freedom. New Delhi remained adamant, however, recognition of Bangladesh preceded prisoner repatriation. Bhutto flew to Karachi from Lalpur to inaugurate Pakistan's first nuclear power plant there on 28th November, promising his fullest support to Professor Salam in his top secret plutonium production labors. The president personally chaired Pakistan's Atomic Energy Commission and the Ministry of Science and Technology he had established earlier in the year, to which he gave the highest priority. Zulfi never deviated from his early resolve to produce atomic weapons that would allow Pakistan to restore its military balance with India, or possibly even tip that balance in the favor of much smaller nation. We are to wage a relentless struggle against all evils that are retarding our progress. Zulfi told his cheering audience in Karachi, I want to achieve results in the shortest possible time. We are, therefore, utilizing all those means which can hasten our progress. The fifth anniversary convention to celebrate the founding of Zulfi's Pakistan People's Party in 1967 was held in the Army's Football and Hockey Stadium in Rawalpindi on the last day of November and the first day of December 1972. Thousands of delegates, 1,700 from Punjab, 650 from Sindh, and 1,000 from frontier provinces and Azad Kashmir poured into Pindi's train and bus terminals for several days before the great show started. They camped under canvas on the spacious grounds surrounding the stadium, a political army ready to hail its leader. Bhutto's photograph was set beside that of Quaid-e-Azam Jinnah's on a green banner some 140 feet long and almost 20 feet high that stretched across one section of the stadium and faced the fortunate delegates. Hundreds of people's guards were on duty at every entrance to the stadium, and the prayers, sermons, speeches, and robustly repeated slogans were all amplified to often deafening magnitude and ear piercing pitch. Mumtaz and Khar shared overall responsibility for the show. Zulfi flew in for the concluding grand ceremony, bringing all the delegates to their feet to cheer their Quaid-e-Awam. The gold embroidered tight collar on the shimmering green silk achkan he wore and his thinning crown of silver hair certainly showed how much Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had changed since his fiery days as the open-collared, two-fisted leader of the People's Crusade to oust the old military dictator with self-aggrandizing ways. Zulfi called again for recognition of Bangladesh and urged his followers to remain confident in his leadership of the nation and the party, promising that he would never compromise on principles. Strikes continued to spread in Sindh, and right-wing Jamaat-e-Islami students protest marches in Lahore and elsewhere in Punjab against the recognition of Bangladesh led to hundreds of arrests before the year's end. Balochistan's Quetta and much of its impoverished rural hinterland also rocked with riots. Armed Bugti tribesmen riding against weaker provincial government forces and many Sindhis forced by Balochi armed antagonists to flee from Lasbela to Karachi. The Tehreek-e-Istiqlal Freedom Party, opposition party of retired Air Marshal Asghar Khan, had been strengthened of late by half a dozen Punjabi defectors from the Pakistan People's Party, led by Mahmood Ali Kasuri and Ahmad Raza Kasuri. Zulfi suspected a conspiracy paid for with foreign money. He appeared on television on 20th December, just 1 year after he had taken over as president, and warned his opponents to be careful. They are responsible for the debacle and now they try to be sanctimonious. Now that we have the authority of the government, you think we cannot tackle them? We know how to deal with them. They opposed Pakistan tooth and nail. They abused Qaid-e-Azam. I do not know why people have such a short memory. Pakistan's industrialists and moneymen had longer memories than Zulfi Bhutto wished. Capital was swiftly fleeing the country as inflation soared. Defense expenditures were climbing despite the loss of half the army and national population, and the cost of the new elite internal security forces was rising precipitously, even as urban and rural security collapsed. Bhutto called the expatriation of wealth sabotage and declared that he had no intention of allowing the economy to collapse, though the stock market had been doing just that. Then he warned all black marketeers and smugglers throughout Pakistan, borrowing a favorite turn of phrase from his good friend President Richard Nixon, who had just invited him to the White House. I must make it abundantly clear, crystal clear, that there is a limit to our patience. The opposition to Zulfi Bhutto grew as the new year began. Threats and harsh words were shouted from the floor of the National Assembly on 2nd January 1973 as the several opposition leaders denied having agreed to any constitutional accord. On 3rd January, Zulfi hoped to replay the previous year's triumphant speech in Karachi's Nishtar Park, but less than a fifth of the 100,000 who had hailed his victorious return to Karachi just 1 year before could be lured or driven to listen to him. This time, security was much tighter and more evident. Barbed wire and steel bars surrounded the isolated stage from which he looked across a clearing of some 90 feet to the first VIP section of seats for his loyal Sindhi followers, who clapped every time he paused and periodically chanted, G.A. Bhutto. Others in the park were less responsive, either listening in silence to raising cries of opposition, especially when he asked for a people's vote on recognition of Bangladesh. Na manzoor, not acceptable, they shouted, much the way so many thousands of young men had done all across Punjab for most of the previous month. Bhutto was visibly shaken, enough to shout in echoing agreement. Na manzoor, na manzoor, na manzoor. That won the crowd to his side, of course, as Bhutto knew it would. The formerly sullen and angry listeners jumped to their feet to applaud, crying out, G.A. Bhutto and Pakistan Zindabad. By all means, don't recognize Bangladesh if you don't want to, Zulfi told them. But also, don't blame me when the prices of sugar and wheat flour register an increase. With heavy expenditure on defense and an annual burden of 90 crore rupees on account of Bangladesh. Until Pakistan recognized Bangladesh, Bhutto explained, it would have to go on paying the full annual international debt of both nations, and that, he asserted, was why all suffered economically. Nor would any prisoners of war be returned prior to recognition, for that was India's way of adding pressure. Though Zulfi clenched his fist and shouted that neither India, nor Russia, nor the United States could pressurize Pakistan into taking this decision. That too brought forth a popular approving echo. Bhutto was still skilled at eliciting positive feedback from a crowd, and when audience apathy settled in again, he resorted to a once familiar tactic. He bared his chest and thundered at his opponents out there, wherever they might be, lurking and conspiring. Who is it that wants to shoot me? Let him come and take a shot. I am not scared. But soon after that, he was spirited away by a phalanx of Federal Security Forces guards who moved swiftly to keep the crowd from crossing the no man's strip till he was back inside his bulletproof limousine. The next day, Zulfi flew to Larkana to celebrate his 45th birthday with his royal guest, the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, and his family in his newly fenced and security gated Al Murtaza ancestral home. In proper regal fashion, he distributed land deeds to 105 thitherto landless peasants from every part of Sindh at Nodoro on the actual day of his birth. Many of the peasants cried as they kissed the deeds, bowing to kiss Sindh's red dust from their president's shoes, and then dancing with happiness. To such Harris of Sindh, he was indeed Raja, king, not just of Larkana, but of the entire land. He had always been good to his peasants, too good. His opponents complained the land he distributed had been taken from the absentee landlords who had in recent years come to Sindh from Punjab without compensation. Zulfi always remained specially fond of celebrations such as this one, and later he and the Sheikh enjoyed a few good days shooting. President Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania came to Pakistan on 8th January, and Bhutto had to be back in Karachi to drink many toasts to his health and that of Madame Ceausescu that evening, and to ever expanding collaboration between their two socialist republics. Zulfi had invited Shah Raza Pahlavi of Iran to Larkana for his birthday, but the latter could not come until shortly after mid-January. He spent several days shooting game and talking business with Zulfi, who desperately needed military supplies from the Shah, primarily to deal with growing Balochistan opposition to his central government. The US embargo on the shipment of arms and spare parts to Pakistan, imposed by Congress after the Bangladesh war had started, made it impossible to get the materials needed to strengthen the air force for use against tribal insurgents. Zulfi's dependence on the Shah and Shah's aloof acceptance of the cordial and gracious Bhutto hospitality left unpleasant memories of Pahlavi in Zulfi's mind after his guest had gone home. There was an uncomfortable perversity about him, Zulfi later wrote, reflecting on this singularly wealthy king of kings. He could be jealous and mean in small things, unrelentingly ruthless and disparaging about personalities. In their absence, he could tell a big lie without blinking. He spoke disparagingly about almost all his neighbors and their leaders. He had a complex towards me. He respected and feared my capabilities. Zulfi noted that the Shah was intensely envious of him and even more revealingly, perhaps, of his own fall that his grandiose designs and fanciful ambitions contributed in no small measure to his ruin. He lost all touch with reality. When Zulfi visited Nixon in the White House in September 1973, he later recollected, much to his chagrin. In good faith, I hinted to him, Nixon, that the Shah was not at all stable, as they thought, and that they should look beyond Iran and lift the arms embargo on Pakistan. It was one of the arguments I used to get the 10-year-old arms embargo lifted, but it was my honest view as well. Kissinger was present in the meeting. Either Kissinger or Nixon or both passed on my views to the Shah. The Shah was mad as hell with me. He was infuriated. He sulked and spoke against me. Zulfi felt obliged to fly to Tehran soon after his faux pas to apologize and to try to mend fences with his sorely offended mighty neighbor. But the Shah never forgave him. Before the end of January 1973, federal troops were ordered into Balochistan. Lasbela had become a hotbed for miscreants, and Akbar Bugti let it be known to Bhutto that he suspected Governor Bizenjo was preparing for the succession of his troubled state. In Baghdad, moreover, a Baloch Liberation Front office had opened, and hidden transmitters kept beaming broadcasts towards Pakistan from Iraq in 4 regional languages. Karachi was a beehive of rumors about an imminent Russian backed invasion and Indo Soviet sabotage aimed at turning Balochistan into another Bangladesh. Wali Khan's 83-year-old father, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, had come to Peshawar from Kabul after 8 years in exile to a royal hero's welcome, unprecedented in living memory. Every Pakhtun tribesman in NWFP was there. The reception made Zulfi as nervous about the returns, heralding a National Awami Party led frontier separatist movement as he was envious of Abdul Ghaffar Khan's popularity. Home Minister Qayyum Khan had advised against allowing the old troublemaker into the country, but Bhutto wisely realized that any attempt to stop him at the Khyber Pass would have been as impossible as it has been for the British Raj to subdue all the armed Pakhtun tribals, whose rugged homeland spanned that and every other NWFP pass. On 14th February 1973, Bhutto wrote to Mir Ghaus Bakhsh Bizenjo, terminating his appointment as governor of Balochistan with immediate effect. Little purpose would be served by going into details about his reasons for doing so. He appointed Nawab Akbar Bugti as the new governor, and the following day he issued a proclamation of removing Balochistan's Council of Ministers. Sardar Ataullah Mengal's ministry had failed to take effective measures to check the large-scale disturbances, resulting in loss of life and property on a massive scale. A week earlier, Chief Minister Mengal had warned at a press conference that if the government were to be toppled by the center, the future of democracy in the country is in danger. Zulfi insisted, however, that Balochistan under Bugti was a democratic state, as it had ever been, and characterized what others called the current crisis a mere storm in a teacup. Bhutto changed the governors of Sindh and the NWFP at this time as well, thereby reminding alarmist critics that the naming of provincial governors was one prerogative of the president. He replaced the National Awami Party governor of the NWFP with a Pathan, Muhammad Aslam Khattak, and though willing to leave Jamiat-e-Ulama Islami's Mufti Mahmood at the helm of his ministry there, Wali Khan insisted he resign and the Mufti agreed. The National Awami Party, Jamiat-e-Ulama Islami accord with the Pakistan People's Party thus died in less than a year. Both frontier provinces were now placed under president's rule, and Tikka Khan's troops kept pouring into Balochistan, fanning out to surround guerrilla camps reportedly discovered in Murri tribal country. Still, President Bhutto said that no shot had been fired, not a single person killed, as yet by the army. But he warned his outraged opposition in the National Assembly that if anyone resorted to violence, it would recoil on them and finish them off forever. He wanted that to be clearly understood. He insisted, moreover, that democracy was the main aim of his Pakistan People's Party. Wali Khan, however, called him Adolf Bhutto, and told his frontier followers that it would be impossible for them to enjoy undiluted democracy until Bhutto was removed from office. President Nixon called for the lifting of the 1971 embargoes on all sales of arms to South Asia on 14th March 1973. India and Bangladesh immediately denounced the move as one designed to escalate tensions and diminish prospects for peace between India and Pakistan. Bhutto was relieved and delighted. He would no longer have to rely upon the doubtful dependability of the Shah of Iran for the arms and spare parts he desperately needed, not simply to keep India from moving west, but to hold restive Mari and Bengal tribesmen of Balochistan within their barren region. Unafraid of any adversity, without and watchful over the enemy within. Bhutto confidently assured his nation that Pakistan Day, 23rd March, we will preserve in the long, hard task of building a Pakistan free from exploitation and at peace with all those neighbors who wish it well. A rejuvenated Pakistan will be a source of strength to the Muslim world and an asset to the Asian American community. Later that very day, he took the salute from the joint services in their Rawalpindi parade, assuring them that by the grace of Allah, the dark clouds are about to disappear. Pakistan's future now looked bright to Bhutto, who focused all his political wits and wisdom on ensuring the enactment of the new constitution. The secular Northwest Frontier National Awami Party leader Wali Khan joined forces with Sindhi Hur leaders, Pir of Pagaro, and Islamic fundamentalists of Maulana Maududi's Jamaat-e Islami, unlikely as that combination sounded to all who knew them, in the United Democratic Front against Bhutto's government. The Pir of Pagaro, with some 40,000 armed hordes at his command, had long been a rival of Bhutto's and, with former Governor Talpur alienated now as well, brought a substantial Sindhi force into the frontier camps of Wali Khan and the former Balochi Governor Bizinjo, all blessed by Maududi and other Maulanas in their grand opposition alliance to the Pakistan People's Party. Youthfully charismatic, Sayyid Sikandar Ali Shah, the Pir of Pagaro, was elected president of the United Democratic Front, and he called upon his followers to boycott the National Assembly barely more than a month before Bhutto promised the nation a new constitution. Bhutto was swift to check his opponents in every political move they dared to make against him. A United Democratic Front rally in Rawalpindi on Pakistan Day, 23rd March, turned into a pitched battle. Wali Khan's tough frontiersmen and Pir Pagaro's Hurs fighting the Pakistan People's Party Punjabi troops trucked in from Sialkot and Camp Belpur to wage Operation Sugar Candy against the Pathans burst in from Peshawar. When the gunfire stopped and the smoke cleared over Pindi's Liaquat Park, 10 were dead and almost 100 wounded. None of the United Democratic Front leaders had even had a chance to speak. A week later, Bhutto solemnly informed the nation over Radio Pakistan that the United Democratic Front had launched a unilateral declaration of illegality against the motherland. On 2nd April, Zulfi met with many leaders of opposition, excluding Wali Khan and the Pir of Pagaro, and several others, of course, and generously conceded many constitutional demands and he had firmly rejected over the past 6 months. He was specially conciliatory to the religious parties, winning Jamaat-e Islami as well as Jamiyat-e Ulama-e Islam and Jamiyat-e Ulama-e Pakistan, away from Wali Khan and his secular-minded socialist comrades, by agreeing that the Prime Minister as well as the President must be Muslims and be required to take a solemn oath to that effect. That special facilities would be set aside throughout Pakistan for the study of Arabic, and that correct and exact versions of the Holy Quran would be printed and distributed. The Islamic Ideology Council, earlier accepted in the October 20th Constitutional Accord, would now be strengthened. nimble political dancer that he was. Zulfi also reaffirmed his complete commitment to his People's Party manifesto, insisting that it was the prime duty of the state to provide work for all of its people as well as food, clothing, housing, education, and medical relief. In an aide memoir he circulated to the opposition leaders on 4th April 1973. Moreover, Bhutto promised that, given time to fulfill our mandate, we will inshallah not fail the people of Pakistan. Finally, though he had most tenaciously argued the previous October in favor of the non democratic two-thirds majority requirement stipulated in the accord for the passage of any no confidence motion tabled in the National Assembly during the first 15 years of the Constitution's life, Zulfi now ordered to reduce that interval to 10 years. He liked to be magnanimous, as aristocratically gracious, making such offers of his own volition, insisting this is proof enough to demonstrate that there is no desire of majority party or any person to perpetuate one party or one man rule. But in return, he demanded an end to the opposition's boycott of National Assembly, insisting that all members get back to work on 7th April and stay there till the constitution is framed. The Peer of Bagado promptly rejected Bhutto's new offers and demanded, but virtually all his United Democratic Front followers abandoned him. They returned to work and passed the new constitution almost unanimously. Some who underestimated Zulfi's political astuteness said miraculously on 10th April 1973. Assembly Speaker Fazl Ilahi Chaudhry formally presented the gold embossed, leather bound, authenticated constitution to President Bhutto at the President's house on 12th April. Thus, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan was reborn under its 1973 constitution. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. The preamble began by noting that sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Almighty Allah alone, and the authority to be exercised by the people of Pakistan within the limits prescribed by Him is a sacred trust. Zulfi fondly hoped that his most impressive political achievement to date would long outlive his own tenure in high office. 10 more years, seeming to him at this time perhaps all that remained for his enjoyment. He would not be vouchsafed as much.